Toby was nervous. Well, he was always nervous on first dates, and this one in particularly made him even more uncomfortable. It's a blind date on a website recommended to him by a mate who he'd known for what felt like centuries. It was worth a try. Luckily, they weren't going to meet in the park over the road because it's now chucking it down. So he's meeting Beth in the restaurant. With his eyes fixed at the door, he plays with the breadsticks. He's thankful that she agreed to this restaurant because it's his favourite place. He feels comfortable here. They do the best rare steak he adores. Hopefully, she'll enjoy this too. He checks his watch frequently. She's a bit late. And a bit late. The door opens. Eyes fixed. This must be her. She shakes off her umbrella and a waiter guides her to the table. Taking off her coat, he lets out a low sigh. Beautiful. Blonde, immaculately dressed. In red. And a nice little touch of a silk red scarf. Immaculate makeup, considering the rain. I was very happy, impressed. Well, the meal goes beautifully. They eat, they drink. They eat, drink, talk, and talk, and talk all through the night until they're the last ones left in the restaurant. Goes so well, they arrange for more. And as the days fly past, date after date, things are beginning to feel a little bit more serious for Toby. Some of these clues were like, snogging at the back of the cinema. No, it felt like a kid again. Although he's well past that time. But after a week of this, the acid test. She invites him to her flat and she will cook a meal for him. This is code, right? This is what he thinks. Is this code? I hope it's code. He stands on the doorstep of her flat. Luckily tonight, it's not raining, as it has been all week. Brilliant moonlight, lovely and dry. And standing right in front of her door, he hesitates to knock. He's anxious in a new way. Well, knock he goes. She opens the door and, immaculately dressed as usual, he thought they were staying in. She tells him, "You better come in. Your mouth is wide open." Her flat is, like her clothes, immaculate, minimalist. Quite pleasant. And he takes in this rather new posh dress that she's wearing, blue polka dots, again with a blue scarf. Now, their relationship all week has been really good. No faults, he couldn't find anything wrong with her, and hopefully that was reciprocated. The only thing he really found a little bit irritating, and it's really minor, is the scarf she keeps wearing. No matter what outfit she wore, she always wore a scarf. Mind you, it always suited her. It was perfect. But that's only minor. That's really... there could be worse things. Well, dinner is served. She timed it very well. And you had to give her credit here, because it was very light food. So perhaps this code was definitely going to be happening. After they ate, she suggested, why don't we watch a film? Okay, he wasn't expecting that. He asked what kind of film? A horror film. That was also a bit of a shock. He wasn't expecting that either. But he had to thank her cunning here. Perhaps because it's a horror film, they could snuggle up on the sofa at the scary bits. That's very clever. Good thinking. And they did too. It was a particularly scary one. It's not something he liked. Well, it wasn't long before the interest in the film waned and they began kissing. Well, things started to warm up quite quickly, to be honest. And while he was working his way along her arm, onto her shoulder, along her collarbone, he got a mouthful of the scarf. Without much thinking, he grabs hold of the scarf while he continues to kiss her neck and tugs. Surprisingly, something happens. Or didn't happen, would be a better way of saying it. Instead of encountering her neck, he encounters air. He stops his kissing and opens his eyes. Her head has gone. While he's trying to process this sudden change of situation, a voice from down in her lap asks Toby very politely if he could reattach her head for her. You see, the scarf was there holding it on, and she was waiting for some new bolts to come. Toby doesn't feel too good about this. He's in a bit of a shock. He wasn't expecting this. But he politely reaches down, lifts her head up, places it back roughly on her shoulders, while Beth struggles with the scarf to reattach. He's not feeling too great. To say it killed the passion is an understatement. And he leans back in the sofa, his stomach churning quite badly. Obviously, Beth looks at him concerned. Toby, she says, are you okay there? You're a bit pale and looking a bit sweaty. Do you feel okay? I know that was probably a bit of a shock for you. Toby nods. Well, he says, I've got to admit that was unexpected. But if we have secrets, then you revealing your secret, I think I really should reveal my secret here, just to get it out of the way. Beth cocks her eye, watches quizzically at him. Toby's sweating begins to shake. She watches as his fingers elongate, his arms thicken, and his face enlarge and straighten. Hair sprouts all over his body as his clothes tear. Beth is ecstatic, clapping her hands in glee. Wow, a werewolf. The monster dating website was fantastic making this match. I love my men wild in bed, so come on. And she grabs his paw and drags him off to the bedroom. Thank you. So welcome to this little bit of storytelling. I'm Inky. For many years, I've been involved in paranormal research into the local area where I live, down here in Dover and the nearby town of Deal. Lots of strange things have happened over the years. And I shall tell some of the stories that I've picked up during my research and, well, first-hand experience. This next one is based on the discovery of a torn page of a diary, famous diary. In 1814, Mary Wolverstone, and a certain Percy Shelley eloped from London. Grabbing a carriage, they went flat out down here to Dover to catch a ship bound for France to escape her family, and they could then elope and marry in France. Of course, this is Percy Mary Shelley. And Mary went on to write one of the greatest horror sci-fi stories that started all of this, Frankenstein. Now, the journey across, usually at that time, took about 3 hours. Unfortunately, on that night, they eloped. A storm hit, and their ship took several hours at least to get across. Her diary was found many years later, with some pages torn out, covering this moment of crossing. But they were discovered. And what I'm going to tell you is what was written in those pages. We boarded the ship bound for France. Glad to be away and seeking a new life with the wonderful Percy. We set out, but a storm hit. It was extremely violent wind. Us women were confined below deck for our own safety, and every man who was able-bodied was sent onto the deck to help control the ship to save us from wreckage on Goodwin Sands, where so many other ships have ended up. That also includes my wonderful Percy. There wasn't many other women. In fact, there was only one other on board. She was very quiet, but I could see there was a lot of fear there. In fact, I was fearful. We could die, shipwreck, any time. And being only young, I think in the end, to escape her own fears, she started to talk. Her name was Margaret, and she was actually a local to Dover. And she too was heading to France, not quite eloping, but seeking a new life with her chaperone of her cousin, who was obviously now above deck. There was idle talk, but she was hiding something. And to pass the time, I endeavoured to extract that information. It's something I will never forget. And I will tell you how she came to be leaving her hometown of Dover. Margaret lived at the foot of the castle with her husband, Charles, a surgeon. He had been a military surgeon for many years, servicing the garrison at the castle and at the fort, and for the more wealthier patrons and residents of the area. They had a good life. They had a rather nice house for a private practice. Charles would go out on calls. Sometimes there'd be visitors. And Margaret just ran the house the best she could. But things, while they were great, something happened. One night, there was a late visitor. Charles got to the door before she did, which was unusual. It was as if he was expecting this visitor. She didn't see who this was. They were well cloaked, kept their hat down, and Charles ushered him into the study and shut the door. Now, I don't often listen to things. My husband's business is confidential, but I didn't feel too good with this. So I had a slight listen towards the door. I couldn't make out the voices, but there were arguments. Not serious that I would feel my husband being threatened, but I then retired that in the safe hope that he would be fine. They talked for a long time, but I then went to bed and left them to it. Come the morning, Charles hadn't come to bed. In fact, he wasn't actually in the house. Normally, we have breakfast first thing in the morning before he goes out on his calls. He didn't turn up. Perhaps he had gone out with this to a call. By lunchtime, there was no sign of him either. This was very unusual, not unique. But come evening, with still no sign of Charles, I began to worry. Luckily, we are friends with the local chief of justice of the peace, and I summoned one of the servants to go and let them know that Charles hasn't been seen. Well, the colonel did turn up, confused. He'd sent out some people and no one had seen my husband for at least a day. He asked, is there any other places we could go? Now, at in the cellar of the house is Charles's lab. Now, occasionally, I would assist him in any procedures in the lab or whatever. That was the only other place I could think he could be, but the door was locked. That was actually unusual too. It had never been locked in the 20-odd years we'd been together. I voiced this to the colonel, and he suggested I should stand back and let him have a quick look just in case there had been an accident. I did. Didn't take the colonel very long to break the door and go down. He bade me stay out here just in case there was hazards, chemicals and all of that. He wasn't down there for very long, and when he came back up the stairs to the door, his face was white as a sheet. He closed the door and told me not to go in. There had been an accident. I was a little overcome, obviously. This is quite a shock. And he took me to the study and sat me down while he called for one of the servants to bring some soldiers from the garrison. I didn't leave the study, but there were some things I gathered just from overhearing and watching people pass the door. Half a dozen soldiers went down. All of them looked quite disturbed as they came back up. Some of them carrying large, wrapped items. Now, I don't quite know how I can put this, but overhearing some of these conversations, they were a bit disturbing. And then finally, when the colonel came back, I had to ask him outright, is Charles okay? His face was dark for some time, but eventually he told me what he found down there. As far as Charles goes, he has no idea. Charles was not down there. But what was down there was disturbing. There were cadavers, partially dissected cadavers. One he recognized as being an ex-convict that had been on the run. And he recognized him through a tattoo that was on one of his arms. The other arm was missing. There are other various body parts and so on down there, all not connected to the same bodies. He'd ordered the soldiers to remove all of those parts and take them to the local cemetery and bury them. As to where Charles was, this is now a criminal investigation. Body snatching, it is clearly he was involved with. A bit of a shock for everybody because he was a well-respected member of the community. Obviously, I took this very badly, and the colonel suggested I should not stay in the house alone. Why don't I come back to his house and his wife can chaperone me and tend to me should I need any assistance? I accepted that. I was in quite a state of shock, and I didn't want to be in the house alone with what was found down there. I didn't tell him about the visitor Charles had the night before. I couldn't quite believe my husband would be involved in such foul and vile act. So I stayed with the colonel and his wife. They gave me a room and tended me quite well. Every now and again, there would be questions about Charles's comings and goings, and I began to suspect that I wasn't quite just there to be a guest. I thought I could be a suspect, although they wouldn't accuse me directly. Well, obviously, there was a search around town. Charles was still missing. It was 2 or 3 days later. Something happened that tended to set this in a whole new, disturbing direction. Not that body snatching alone wasn't bad enough, but there were some murders in town, in the pier district down on the docks. A couple of sailors beaten to death. A woman selling matches also killed brutally, all of them. No witnesses until another attempted attack of a one-armed man. Now, I remember the colonel mentioning about this one-armed man, but he was buried. And then the colonel admitted, a day or so after all those body parts were buried, the grave was disturbed and all the body parts removed. My head span with that. I could not process this. Well, another murder attempt occurred, and this one-armed man was spotted and chased. He was chased up onto the cliffs at a high point over the pier district, and he ran straight over the edge while being pursued. The body was never found. The sea claimed it. It was then they found the body of my husband, Charles. He had been badly beaten and stuffed into into a barrel in one of the warehouses. Well, with no case to answer, the justice just said, this is not a place I could probably stay. The humiliation, the gossip. So I sold the house. And my cousin from up in London came down and told me he could take me to France, to other family, and escort me there. And I could then start a new life. And so I'm here on this boat. So those were the words this Margaret told me. But that was not the end of the story. For several hours, the ship buckled in the wind and the rain. And finally, I heard cry. They were approaching Calais. Percy came down and poked his head round the door, tell me to return to my cabin and prepare to leave the ship. We'll be off. We'll be docking shortly. So as I made my goodbyes to Margaret and wished her the best of luck with her new life, another figure turned up. Her cousin. He opened the door. I had never seen such a foul-looking man. Unkempt, wild-eyed. Perhaps that was just the wind. Billy told Margaret to get her stuff together and they'll be leaving too soon. But as he shut the door, he shouted something else to her that I couldn't quite make out. But Margaret did. Her eyes were wide in fear. She grasped my arm, looked at me with absolute terror, and whispered. That's the muffled voice I heard the night Charles went missing. I had to leave her at that point. But I fear for Margaret. That's that one, thank you. And none of that's true, by the way. I have to say this. I did an event, I did a show a few months back, and people were writing all this down, thinking it was true. It's not true. Fiction. All right, how are we going? How are we going? Oh, well, let's have a bit of sci-fi. Let's have a bit of sci-fi. Well, this one has some elements of truth. I spend a lot of my time looking for interesting and unusual things around the town. I create a newsletter that goes out with quite crazy things. Over the years, this has drawn attention. And one day I was approached by, well, they claim to be a government department interested in unusual phenomenon. And they said they'd pay me well if I was to feed back any interesting stories back to the office. Free money for a bit of what I normally do. I didn't find a problem with that. They wouldn't give me any contact names or anything, so I tended to refer to them as the firm. Well, on my usual perusal of the local papers, looking for anything unusual, one November night, which let's say this was probably late 90s, early 2000s, I stumbled upon a interesting newspaper article by a young lad called Jimmy Patterson. The photo showed him holding what looked like a large glowworm. Now, it was a black and white photo, so hard to tell, but it was quite large, and his little column that was there had been written about him said he'd found this unusually large glowworm on his way home one night from scouts. Unremarkable, but you know, it fills a couple of column inches in a local paper where they're struggling to fill the page. Didn't think much of it. Now, a couple of weeks later, flicking through same local newspaper again, there's mention of the Patterson family again. This time, reported missing. Well, neighbours have reported them missing. It was getting towards December, party time. They could have just gone away. Didn't think much of it. Unusual, but nothing totally crazy. A week later, there were still reports of them being missing. But then there was a new turn of events. The neighbours were complaining about strange lights and sounds coming from the Pattersons' property. Now, there were police called. Police hadn't found anything. They were claiming it might have just been, people reported missing, teenagers finding a house empty, decided to have a party there. It's that time of year. It's dark. Under the cover of darkness, they can get away with most things. No damage was really caused. No, the property wasn't entered or anything. So I thought, this is a little bit more interesting. I'll have a poke around too. Strange lights, missing people. Well, they happen to live in a street called Wilson Avenue in Deal. It's a mining estate. They're all sort of semi-detached terraces as well. The Pattersons were on the end terrace. So for snooping, not too bad. I went there during the day, had a scout around, spoke to a lot of the locals with my journalist hat on. Now, you get the usual kind of response. Some envious of, they kept themselves to themselves. They were a little bit more posh for the area. So perhaps they were away on holiday or something, or because of little Jimmy's foray into the paper of the previous time with this glowworm, might have got a little bit of fame, and because it might have drawn a bit of interest. Others just saying, the lights possibly from other parties and kids causing havoc and stuff. Not so much. So nothing earth-shattering until I talk to the Pattersons' only neighbour. That was very interesting. At first, they tried to brush me off. But I noticed every time I mentioned the Pattersons, they cast a glance to next door. Odd thing to do. So I pushed them a bit more. And they started to clam up. I sweetened them. But again, eventually when they did start to talk, they kept looking next door. Very fearful. So I asked them about all this, flashing lights and sounds and stuff. Yeah. Well, they told me since the Pattersons had gone, they could hear animal sounds in the house. They knew the Pattersons didn't actually have any pets. And if they had, they would have probably taken them away. They've been gone a while. It sounded like a dog or something really hungry or in pain. And then there's the lights. They disregarded the lights being from elsewhere, December, Christmas parties, lots of lights, strange lights going on around the area. No, they were pretty certain the lights were coming from the house. And as far as the police going with kids having parties, no, they didn't think it was that. They hadn't heard any music or anything. Well, eventually the conversation dried up, and I thought I'd better just give up and wait for the cover of darkness. Now, I've seen these kind of horror films before. You go to an house in the dark and things happen. Now, I'm obviously not going to go to a house and attempt to break in broad daylight. So it has to be the dark. Luckily, end terrace, I could get into the garden, no problem. Well, I had to climb the fence, but I got into the garden with my torch. Well, I could definitely agree that this was not a problem with police and kids and so on, because the garden looked immaculate apart from the odd bike lying around, no rubbish, nothing. If there were kids having a party in here, they tidied up really well afterwards, which doesn't seem right to me. So I approached the back of the house. The back of the house was the kitchen. Now I had to be careful because looking straight through the kitchen, there was a door into the front room, and that door was open. So I couldn't use my flashlight too much because people walking past would have spotted it. So I kept the beam low, and it was just a normal kitchen, table in the middle, that door to the front, door to the side, and I could see some stairs going up to the next floor. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary here. No breakages, nothing. I couldn't see any damage inside the kitchen. And then I jumped. The table moved. I shone the torch in there again. Table shook a bit. Okay, perhaps there is an animal in there. Must have got in, perhaps through one of the front door, or some prank or something. The table then pushes quite hard against the sink that's right in front of me through the window. And then I have to admit, I almost screamed, which is no good if you're trying to keep a low profile, because something came up over the end of the table that I wasn't quite expecting to see. It was a silvery, let's say, appendage, like a snake. Bit like that photo that Jimmy had of that thick glowworm, slow worm, but a lot longer, and it was very snaky. It came over and started prodding at the window, right in my face, where my face was. Now, I'd never seen anything like that. I don't ever want to see anything like that again. And before I wanted it getting through the glass and becoming a problem for me, I thought I'd better run away. I'm not proud of that, but, I did. Well, my heart was beating really quite hard by the time I got home. That was terrifying. But it was something I probably had to tell the firm. So I make the call. I'm on hold for a while. I tell this strange person at the other end, who I've got no idea who it was, what happened. I go on hold for a while. I then get them back saying an operative will be sent to me to deal with this. So, oh, okay, that's a new one. Never done this before. And in the meantime, through tomorrow, because he'll come the next night, I was to go and buy a load of things on a list, which they gave me over the phone. Well, I spent the day buying the stuff on the list, and to be honest, I'm surprised the police weren't called, because some of that stuff was pretty highly volatile. So I waited for the cover of darkness, Around 4 o'clock, a knock on the door. Now, I was expecting a really clean cut, kind of commando ninja-y, some kind, no. Well, okay, he was clean cut, crew cut, young, just with a khaki trousers and jacket. Nothing clever. He carried a bag which had lots of weird, pointy bits sticking, projecting out, which I didn't quite grasp. If you've seen those kind of, well, I didn't know what they were. I offered him a cup of tea before we go out and face whatever kind of thing this was, and he refused. Who goes out to fight a weird thing without a cup of tea? He had no conversation either, so I thought we'd just better get on with him. Well, we get to the garden, climb over. He opens his bag and he pulls out, well, if you've seen any of these 1950s sci-fi films with sort of ray guns with lots of pointy, jaggy bits which completely serve no purpose, that's what he pulled out the bag. I almost laughed, but then I looked at his face and he wasn't thinking that was very funny. So I stifled that. But what he did give me was what he then, he only explained as a flare. I thought, yeah, what's this? So he had to explain a little bit more. He was going to go in there and deal with whatever this was. But should things go horribly wrong, on his way in, he was going to dump the bag with all these very flammable things in the kitchen. And should things go bad, I was to activate the flare and lob it at the bag and then probably run, because things would get quite hot and exploding. Good, I'm not going in there with you. That's all I thought. Well, he disappears into the darkness. He's there a while. No noise. I'm straining through the crack of the door, trying to catch a noise. I look at where he went through the side door and then up the stairs. At that moment, I see some strange flashing. It's like a strobe. I then see him running down the stairs, pointing this, let's say, ray gun, back up the stairs, and lots of strange strobe lights going on. He hurtles towards the door, looking absolutely terrified. That's the only expression I've actually seen it from him that wasn't really dull. I thought this was probably a bad thing. He got to the door. He was about to say something, but then a silvery thing got him round the neck and started to drag him back. He pointed roughly at the bag on the floor before disappearing into the darkness. Now, I didn't know what to make of that, so I just had to do what he seemed to indicate was activate the flare, lob it, and I ran. Well, there was fire, obviously. Nothing massively explodey. I was probably glad I got out the garden when I did, because there was a bit of a bang. The newspapers say there was a fire, probably a gas explosion. Nothing too serious. Next door weren't badly damaged, but the kitchen was destroyed and the house slightly gutted. No other comments were mentioned by the police or the fire brigade or anything in the newspaper. I even inquired with my contacts at the police, saying there was nothing really there. I thought we'd got away with that. Then in the spring the following year, I'd almost forgotten about this. And I saw a gardener moaning about an infestation of large, thick silver slugs, bigger than he'd ever seen before. But he had burnt them and just hoped there weren't going to be any more. I certainly hope there won't be any more. Perhaps they were connected. Thank you. Right, before we get on with the very last one, thank you for coming along to the free PBH Free Fringe show. Woohoo! Let me stick in the thingy for the Eventbrite. There were some links for donations to the Free Fringe, possibly even me if you enjoyed this enough. Do see other shows, and there's plenty of them. I'm back again I got 4 of these particular ones, and then I'm also up at the Edinburgh Fringe in person for a week doing my ancient Egyptian stories, which went off really well last time, so hopefully in person they'll do right. But enjoy. Now, the last one. I love this one. Let's have a little bit of absinthe. Jill was excited. A new babysitting job at the posh end of town. She was hoping to get away from all the usual snotty kids and the usual rubbish and the grief they give her messing around all night. And she was hoping for a little bit more of a well-behaved kid. And when she met little Kate, she was an absolute bless. Her parents left takeaway menus, said she could order anything she wanted, and there was some cash there for pizza if she needed it. She could have anything from the fridge, anything she could want to watch on the TV, no problem. And little Kate, she sat with Jill on the sofa. Kate watched a load of little cartoons and so on, and went without any argument to bed well before her usual bedtime. Jill thought this was fantastic. No grief. She took Kate up to the bedroom, tucked her in, and came downstairs to then consider what she's going to do for the rest of the evening with such an easy job. She'd flicked on the TV and started looking through to see what films she could have and grabbed the pizza menu to have a choose of what she wanted. Then she heard a scream. Oh, perhaps this isn't going to be the good job as I thought it was, she thought. She rushed upstairs to find Kate sobbing in bed. Sitting beside her, she calmed her down. "What's the matter, Kate?" Jill said. And between sobs, Kate pointed to the bedside table. "Billy has been bad again. I don't like Billy. He won't leave me alone." Okay, thinks Jill. Is this pet? And she looks to the bedside table and sees a little clown doll. Okay. "Don't worry, Kate," Jill says. "I'll take Billy away." So she grabs the clown doll and returns back downstairs to have a look at the menu and for the TV. Kate, once Billy is gone, settles down quite quick. Right, well, she finds what she wants to watch and the pizza she wants. So she goes and places the order. Job done. 15, 20 minutes, no problem. Perhaps Kate will settle now. Got this little problem out the way. Another screen. Jill is prepared to take everything back. This is going to be a nightmare kid. She doesn't run as quickly back upstairs as she did the first time. Again, she finds Kate crying. But she notices Billy's on the end of the bed this time. How did Kate do that, she wonders. She's a sneaky one. She grabs Billy and tells Kate, Billy will stay away. Eventually, Kate calms down and lays back down in bed. Jill returns to the front room. Now, obviously, Kate's messing with her. And she took her eye off this one. But she's not going to let this girl play mind games with her. So she puts Billy next to the TV where she can keep an eye on it. So if Kate does sneak down, there's no way she'll be missed. She'll be doing this without getting spotted. Well, everything's quiet. Perhaps Kate's worked out that she's been done, being rumbled. Doorbell rings. Jill's, surprisingly, jumps. She didn't realise Kate had wound her up this much. She goes to the door. Pizza. Grabbing a pizza, paying the guy, she returns back to the sofa. Putting her pizza down, she goes to turn the TV and start the film. It's at that point she sees Billy has gone. Wow. Kate is really fast. Wonder if she does this to all her babysitters. Well, Jill's deciding whether to march upstairs and give Kate a bit of a, small talking to. Obviously, she doesn't, it's a little one. She doesn't want to give her some nightmares or anything or upset the parents. And the phone rings. Jill's not entirely certain what to do about this, so she wanders over to the phone and sees the caller display saying, Mum Mobile. Parents checking in on me. Not a problem. So she picks it up. And yes, it's Kate's mum. They have a bit of a chat. She asks how well Kate's been going. Well, she didn't want to really say that Kate's being a bit of a pain in the ass. That doesn't do your future prospects for jobs work any better. And, it's paid well, even despite Kate being a bit of a pain. Oh, no. Kate's fine. She went off to bed fine. But there's been a slight problem with one of her Teds or toys or whatever. She keeps moaning about this Billy doll waking her up. There's an odd noise from the other end of the phone. Jill says, What's this? Kate's mum takes a deep breath. She hears the intake of breath. Jill, she says, I want you to listen very carefully. Billy is a very bad boy. We don't want any incidences like last time. So, I want you to get Kate, get her coat, and leave the house immediately. And whatever you do, do not take your eyes off Billy. Do you understand? We are on our way home right now. Jill's not sure what to make of this. Are they all completely nutters in this house? She's about to just put the phone down. And when she turns to look towards the kitchen, she drops the phone. On the archway into the kitchen, appears to be smeared bits of pizza forming a sentence. Let's play hide and seek. You hide, and I will find you. Jill's about to say something when the lights go out. Pleasant dreams.